Hey, how's it going guys? Chris here with another Battlefield 1 Weapons showdown, and in today's video we're going to be taking a good look at two of the game's most effective long-range scout rifles, used more so for popping headshots at those extreme distances and sniping enemy players from defensive positions. The first gun in question is Mauser's Gewehr 98, a pretty common German service rifle used by the Central Powers during the First World War, and the second being the all-American M1903 Springfield, another bolt-action service rifle which was used by US troops throughout and beyond the Great War II. When it comes to Battlefield 1, statistically speaking, both of these rifles function in ways to give them an advantage against opponents far away in the distance, making them better suited than a lot of the other scout weapons for sniping over longer ranges. And so I'm going to be taking all of those stats and factors into account to determine which gun is better than the other in specific ways, and explaining along the way why one might seem better suited, or perhaps even easier to use in certain scenarios. Though because we're focusing on the long-range capabilities of the two guns, I'm going to be ruling out the M1903 experimental variant for pretty obvious reasons, looking at the bolt-action variants exclusively and seeing how they compare with the Gewehr 98. So the scout rifles typically deal some of the largest amounts of damage per shot, and in the Gewehr 98 and the M1903's case, it's basically a two-shot kill over all ranges, apart from in those sweet spot zones. Though if one of those rifle rounds hits your target in the face, then it's pretty much game over for them, until they spawn back in of course. And this is why you want to be going for those headshots whenever you can, as they're going to cut down kill times exponentially and leave your opponent with no room to counter your attack. Because both rifles are better suited for longer ranges, this makes them very ideal weapons for taking on other snipers with high magnification optics, as so long as you're planting those headshots, both guns are going to be as deadly as each other, so there's no difference there. But a lot of the time, you're not going to be able to go for those headshots, because the player you're aiming at is running around in an unpredictable pattern, or you're just being suppressed, making it a lot harder to get that bullet to go where you want it to, so body shots are the next best thing to go for. This is where the weapon's sweet spot zones and higher damage values at specific ranges come into the scene, allowing you to still pull off one-hit kills and punch more life out of your enemy's health bar, often killing already weakened players more reliably. The Gewehr 98's sweet spot lies between 80 and 125 meters, whereas the M1903's sweet spot is set slightly further out, between the ranges of 100 and 150 meters. Which pretty much gives the Gewehr 98 an advantage in terms of stopping power if the guy you're shooting at is about 80 to 100 meters away from you. The M1903 is the deadliest rifle if your opponent is running around a bit further away than this, beyond 125 meters up to 150. So this might give the M1903 a bit of an edge for killing targets a bit more effectively further away than the Gewehr 98, which might often prove to be a more dangerous option for those mid to long range battles instead. Sweet spot damage is a very important aspect to keep in mind when choosing a scout rifle, and both the Gewehr 98 and M1903 sweet spot zones overlap each other, basically meaning that both guns are going to be as effective as each other between the ranges of 100 and 125 meters. But the M1903 zones actually span over a slightly larger area of 50 meters, as opposed to the Gewehr's span of 45. So the M1903 has a 5 meter advantage in terms of it being able to kill in one shot, along with the fact that it actually has a slightly faster fire rate too, technically making it the strongest option of the two when it comes to lethality, from a stats viewpoint anyway. But it mainly comes down to the ranges you're going to be using the weapons the most, that really determines how deadly they're going to be in comparison to each other, making both superior within their own optimal ranges. Now pretty much all the Scout's bolt-action rifles have the same recoil patterns and spread stats, putting both the Gewehr 98 and M1903 on the same level when it comes to general accuracy. Both guns have a vertical kick value of 2 and horizontal kick values of 1, along with the fact that they're only going to be precise if you're standing still, due to the way the weapon spread increases when you're strafing around, which will basically cause shots to fly off target and miss. This is the typical kind of behaviour for most scout rifles, and because the Gewehr 98 and M1903 both use a rotating bolt, as opposed to a straight bolt action, you're going to have to unscope after every shot if you're using longer ranged optics anyway, pretty much making those recoil figures irrelevant, as you'll need to reacquire a target when firing a follow-up shot, should your first bullet not kill them outright. The gun's recoil and spread values might not be different, but there's a few other things to take into account when deciding which weapon is the most accurate, or easiest to aim with. And probably the most important factors when it comes to the scout rifles is muzzle velocity and bullet speed. which doesn't affect the way the gun physically kicks around, but does affect the trajectory of your shots, and therefore makes a gun easier or trickier to use against moving targets over longer ranges where bolt-action rifles are generally going to be more suitable. The Gewehr 98 has the highest muzzle velocity in the game, with its bullets travelling at a speed of 880 meters per second when they leave the barrel of your gun, whereas the M1903's muzzle velocity is a little bit lower, matching up with a few of the other Scout's rifles like the Mosin and the Russian 1895, with its bullets travelling at the speed of 820 meters per second, so 7% slower than the Gewehr 98's rounds. This might not sound like a massive difference, but it does generally mean that you won't have to lead your enemy's movements quite as much with the Gewehr 98, with you only having to shoot slightly in front of a running player in most situations. Obviously, the further away your opponent is, the more you'll probably need to lead your shot, if they're moving. If they're standing still, or if you're counter-sniping, then this probably won't seem like a huge factor, but generally, a higher muzzle velocity often makes a gun easier to use over those further distances, because bullets are going to hit targets faster. Though the M1903 does have one trick up its sleeve that helps its effectiveness over those extreme ranges, and that's the fact that it's got a slightly lower bullet drag value than the Gewehr 98, along with most of the other bolt-action rifles too. This allows your bullets to travel at a slightly more consistent speed, without slowing down as much while it flies through the air. And although the Gewehr's higher muzzle velocity is still going to give your shots more momentum within both of the gun's sweet spot zones, basically making it a better trade-off, that slightly lower drag value might help with the bullet trajectory over those very long ranges, where sweet spot zones are obsolete. Though in most cases, within general sniping distances, the Gewehr 98's higher velocity is probably going to be a lot more beneficial than the M1903's lower drag, usually making the Gewehr 98 a bit easier to use for landing shots on moving targets far away. As far as reliability goes, both the Gewehr 98 and M1903 have fairly similar, but not exactly the same properties regarding how they handle with ammunition, as the two guns have a 5-round maximum capacity, and they're both able to reload using stripper clips, along with individual bullets which can be added to their internal magazines independently. 5 shots generally allows you to take on up to 5 enemies per reload, possibly more if you're jammy enough to net a couple of kills with a single bullet. So the two guns are on par with each other regarding ammo count, and so whichever rifle you opt for, you should at least be able to kill a couple of enemies with a full magazine, with it taking either 1 or 2 shots to bring someone down. Whenever you expend those 5 shots and run out of ammo, there's going to be a brief period of vulnerability where you'll either have to rely on your trusty sidearm to finish someone off, or top the gun back up with ammo to carry on using it. And although a long-range sniper rifle might not seem like the worst thing in the world to run out of ammo with, due to the fact that you can often slink behind cover or retreat to a safe place to perform those reloads, a scout rifle having quicker reload times just might make the difference in allowing you to finish off an enemy weakened by your first shot, before they have a chance to dash off to safety while you fumble around with those stripper clips, technically increasing the number of bullets you can actually fire within a set time, which always comes in handy when you're dealing with bipoded LMG users along with other long-range snipers too. This is where the Gewehr 98 actually has the advantage, being able to perform both its clip reloads and individual bullet reloads a little bit quicker than the M1903. The Gewehr 98's empty reload takes about 3.47 seconds to perform, as opposed to the M1903's 3.7 second reload, and it's going to take between about 2.67 to 4.17 seconds to slot in another 1 to 4 bullets, unlike the M1903, which is going to take a tiny bit longer, lasting between 2.83 to 4.33 seconds. It's not exactly a huge difference in times, but this will technically enable the Gewehr 98 to fire more rounds per minute, and make up for the fact that it shoots a tiny bit slower than the M1903. So in a way this does help to balance things out, making the Gewehr 98 a slightly more reliable weapon in the process, as quicker reload times can often seem more beneficial than faster fire rates anyway, due to you having to reacquire your targets after each shot, making the small differences in fire rates seem a little bit less important. So which weapon should you choose? Although both the Gewehr 98 and M1903 perform well over all ranges, but more specifically the longer ones, there's definitely a few notable differences to separate the two slightly, making one seem better than the other depending on the player using it. The two guns are designed with long-ranged engagements in mind, put into the game for players who prefer to snipe unsuspecting enemies across the map, protect flags and objectives from a distance, and of course take on other snipers. But some factors might make a certain gun seem easier or deadlier to use at specific ranges, therefore giving the guns a bit of distinction. The M1903 might generally seem to be the better rifle for those longer ranges, and might even seem to perform better at taking down players across the map too, due to it having a larger sweet spot zone that's further out than the Gewehr 98, along with it having a slightly more consistent bullet speed over extreme ranges, with less bullet drag. Because its sweet spot zone stretches out further than the Gewehr 98, it's basically capable of dealing higher amounts of damage beyond 125 meters, which might be a bit of a deal breaker if you prefer to take on your enemies further away in defensive positions. The Gewehr 98 on the other hand might prove to be the deadlier and maybe even easier rifle to use otherwise, with its sweet spot zone starting a tad closer, at a late medium range, and eventually overlapping with the M1903's zone further away, ending a bit sooner, but starting earlier too. The fact that the Gewehr 98 has a faster muzzle velocity might also make it seem easier to use for landing shots on moving targets, being more beneficial than the M1903's lower drag, which is only really useful for attacking over extreme distances. And while you're using the gun within its optimal zone against players scrambling around over those mid to long ranges, this could often be one of the biggest advantages that the Gewehr 98 has when compared with the M1903, along with the other Scout weapons too for that matter. This might not really matter a great deal when you're landing headshots on other snipers lying prone on top of a hill, as the M1903's slightly lower muzzle velocity isn't going to hinder the gun's effectiveness against stationary targets, perhaps making the M1903 the better anti-sniper weapon of the two, dealing even more power over a further distance. Though the Gewehr 98's slightly quicker reloads, faster muzzle velocity, and earlier sweet spot might make it seem a bit more dependable for landing shots on moving enemies and keeping you alive, while you take on other players a bit closer to the action. So that's it for this one folks, hope you enjoyed the guide and maybe learned a thing or two. Hit that like button if you did, and subscribe to see loads of other Battlefield videos, old, new and upcoming. Take it easy, and I'll see you in that next episode.